Hey there folks, Andrew Swan here, and today I'm going to be doing what I hope will be the last in a series of update videos to my AVISynth Plus, QTGMC, and FFMPEG workflow tutorial. This video is partly a correction to a mistake that I made in that tutorial video when I said that QTGMC can't run in 64-bit mode. It turns out that it can absolutely run in 64-bit AVISynth. And not only that, it has a roughly 10% speed boost over 32-bit. But I'm not just going to show you how to set up the 64-bit version of AVISynth Plus, QTGMC, FFmpeg, and AVSPmod. In part, that's because that setup process is essentially the same as in my original video tutorial, which I'm going to link to in the recommended videos right about now. What I am going to show you is how to set up both the 32-bit and 64-bit versions of all of those programs on the same system. There's a couple of reasons for doing this. The first is that there's a whole huge number of legacy plugins for AVISynth that are only compatible with 32-bit AVISynth Plus. Also, there's sort of a minor annoyance thing where the 64-bit version of AVSPmod, at least at the time of this recording, has an issue where anytime you use the image preview function, it will pop up a bunch of error messages and a little window in the background. That's maybe a minor annoyance, but it's enough of a thing for me that I work on my AVISynth scripts in the 32-bit version of AVSPmod, and then just take that script and render it out using the 64-bit version of FFmpeg in order to bypass all of that. If you've already gone through and set up the 32-bit versions of these programs as per my original video tutorial, you don't have to start from scratch here. I'm going to put a link down in the video description down below with a timestamp, and you can use that timestamp to go to the part of this video where you can kind of pick up and do all the additional stuff that you need in order to set up the 64-bit versions of the programs. But for those of you who are coming to this for the first time, just know that I am going to go through these initial steps relatively quickly since I've covered them already in my previous tutorial video. But if you're having trouble keeping up, don't worry. I do have a blog, macelatthefront.blogspot.com, where there will be a corresponding post up there with all the instructions for this tutorial, as well as all my previous tutorials. I put up a new post for pretty much every tutorial that I do. Also, if there's any minor corrections or updates I have to make on a tutorial, it'll show up there first rather than me making a whole separate video. Finally, some little caveats that are just kind of standard to all of my tutorials. I make no guarantees that this will be either safe or secure on your system. It is entirely possible that some random bad actor has gotten into one of these programs and has inserted some malicious code. I will always tell you to virus scan anything that you download off the internet before putting it on your system. But again, I make no guarantees that something like VirusTotal is going to actually catch something malicious before it makes its way onto your system, so just don't say I didn't warn you. Also, there are alternate options available if you are not comfortable using this tutorial. You can use the Fields Kit plugin, which is available for Premiere Pro, After Effects, and Final Cut Pro. You can also use a real-time hardware video conversion box like the Teranex. So, without further ado, let's just get started. First, we're going to have to start with AVISynth Plus, which we will get off of the AVISynth homepage, and go under where it says Download AVISynth, Forks, AVISynth Plus, and down to Latest Release. You will just be getting the standard installer. Don't worry about these other ones here. Thankfully, AVISynth Plus actually includes both the 32-bit and 64-bit versions in the same installer and installs them by default. So it's pretty simple to set up. Then back on the main page, go down to the external filters link, and we're going to grab all the plugins we need. So source filters, FFMPEG source. This is what's going to allow us to load up our video files into AVISynth. Okay, so just grab it from the download link. Go back to the external filters page and go down to deinterlacing. QTGMC, which is our deinterlacer of choice. Download the QTGMC archive, and then you're going to need all of these core plugins and scripts. So it'll be Mask Tools 2, MV Tools 2, NEDI 3, RG Tools, and SMD Grain, which is a script. It's on a pastebin link, so just click on the download link right above the text here, and that should grab it. You will need to rename the 3-letter extension at the end from .txt to .avsi. I'll show you that in a sec. And then down below the optional plugins and scripts, there's a link here to the FFTW3 library, Windows builds. You're going to click on that link and grab the 32-bit version. Okay, going back to the main page again, we're going to go to the utilities link and go down to AVSPmod. Specifically, we're going to go to the end of the line here where it says latest build, blah, 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 can be found here. Click on the here. And you're going to want to grab both the 32 and 64-bit versions of AVSPmod from there. Okay. Finally, we're going to go to the semi-official homepage for the Windows binary builds of FFmpeg. And we're going to grab the latest nightly. This will be the longer version number up here. 64-bit Windows architecture and static linking version of FFmpeg. And then select the 32-bit version of the nightly static linking build and grab that. Okay. Once you have all those, go ahead and virus scan everything that you have just downloaded, and then we'll go about the process of installing everything. Brief digression here. Was called to my attention that FFmpeg source actually shows up as having one virus detection in VirusTotal. And so I re-uploaded and scanned it again, and this is what you get back. I'm not saying that you should completely disregard this, but just view it with a certain air of skepticism if you don't see the detection reflected in the majority of other antivirus engines here. However, if you are working for a government agency or you're on like a Hollywood movie shoot or something like that, don't jeopardize the safety of your system, even if it's a really, really tiny chance. So I actually have a folder here with all of the various files that you would have downloaded, a couple of extras in here that I'll get to in a bit, but we're going to start with the AVISynth Plus installer. Okay. Now I've actually disabled the secure desktop feature of the user account control pop-up. So normally there should be sort of a darkened area around this pop-up, but it messes with my screen recording software. So I've disabled it just for this tutorial, just to let you know. Okay, and also make sure that this is AVISynth Plus and not something else that pops up. All right. Click yes. Select English language, go next. I accept this agreement that I am never going to read. Next. The default directory is fine. You can install AVISynth Plus pretty much anywhere you want on your system. Just make sure that you remember where it is so that you know where to put the plugin files. But I'm going to keep it with its default, even though it's a little extra hassle in terms of setup. But it's good for organization because it'll be in your program files x86 folder by default. Okay, go next. And as you can see, both the x86 and x64, those being the 32-bit and 64-bit versions of AVISynth Plus, are selected for sort of the default install. Don't bother with any of these additional features. They don't really add that much to the experience. And in fact, the one that I do wish worked, which is add AVISynth script to new items menu, does not work, or at least does not work on my system. So click next, install, and finish. Okay, so there's your AVISynth Plus install. Now we got to put in all the plugin files. So go to your system drive, whatever that is, and then go to Program Files x86, or again, whatever directory you've installed AVISynth Plus into. Go to your AVISynth Plus folder, and let's start with Plugins Plus. That's where all the 32-bit versions of the plugins will be installed. Okay. So I'm going to install the plugins first, and then the .avsi scripts, and then finally the FFTW3 libraries. So for the plugins, I'm just going to go down the list here, starting with FFMPEG source 2. You open up that archive. If this archive doesn't open for you, you get some sort of an error. You probably don't have some program installed to open 7-zip files. You can just go to 7-zip.org and grab 7-zip off of there and install that first, and then these should open up. For the 32-bit versions of any of these plugins, they will usually be in a folder within the archive that's called x86. So open that up and just copy over the DLL file. Same thing with Mass Tools 2. And MV Tools, which you will only need the MV Tools 2.dll. And Netty 3 actually has a number of different options here. It depends on the instruction sets that your processor supports. A lot of newer processors will support AVX2. Some that are a little older than that will support AVX. And if your processor supports neither of those, you just want to do the release_W7 folder. If you are in doubt as to what your processor supports, you can download CPU-Z. It'll list all the information on your processor, including what instruction sets it supports. I happen to know that my processor supports AVX, but not AVX2, so I will be using that version. And then RG Tools. Okay. Now for the .avsi scripts. So that's going to be QTGMC. And SMD grain, when you first download it, will probably look like this, because it's a text file. Thankfully, .avsi files are just text files with a renamed extension. So to change that into a form that will work for AVISynth, all you got to do is right-click, rename, and change the 3-letter extension to .avsi. If you do not see a 3-letter extension after the end of SMD grain, then that means that you've got hide known file extensions turned on, which I believe is the default in Windows 10. It's easy to fix. All you have to do is go over to your Start menu, type in Folder, click on the File Explorer Options item, go to the View tab, go down to Hide Extensions for Known File Types, uncheck it, and click OK, and you should now see all of your file extensions, okay, and be able to modify them. So copy over SMD grain, because you're going to need that again for the 64-bit versions of all of these. Okay, speaking of which, let's go ahead and go over into Plugins 64+ and go through this same thing. So FFmpeg source 2, again, go to the x64 folder this time inside the archive. Mass Tools 2, same thing. MV Tools 2, same thing. In Eddy 3, once again, make sure that you use the version that your processor will support. And RG Tools. So all of those, you're using the x64 version of the plugin. All right. Then copy over QTGMC and SMD grain. All right. That's installed everything for AVISynth Plus, with one exception, which is for QTGMC to work, you have to go into your Windows directory, go to the syswow64 folder, scroll down until you get into the files here, and now for one of the more annoying parts of this process, which is the FFTW3 library. So open up that archive, and what you're going to be copying over is this libffTW3f-3.dll. Don't need anything else from this archive. So copy that over into your syswow64 folder. And then the annoying part, copy out another copy of that DLL file somewhere else, like on your desktop or whatever, and then just right-click, rename it, and change the name to FFTW3.dll. And then put that in your syswow64 directory. Once that is done, you now have AVISynth Plus and QTGMC set up. So the next step is going to be FFmpeg. And for that, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating two separate folders, one for the 32-bit version of FFmpeg and the other for the 64-bit version of FFmpeg. Now, because the file name of the FFmpeg binary is the same in both cases, which is ffmpeg.exe, we're going to be actually using a batch file in each of those directories to point to the FFmpeg binary that will have sort of a different name for each. And that way you won't have an issue where you are trying to run two different versions of the program with the same file name, which, conflicts and it's messy and it doesn't work. And I'll show you how to do this. Full credit where credit is due here. I got the majority of this process from an excellent tutorial by John Hall on his website, specifically how to set up FFmpeg. Unfortunately, his site has been down for a while, so I don't know, it may be back up by this point, but I just wanted to give him credit because I never would have figured this out on my own. So, in keeping with the way that I've already installed AVISynth Plus in Program Files x86, I'm going to put the 32-bit version of FFmpeg in Program Files x86 in a folder called FFmpeg 32. All right. And I'm going to go back over to my downloaded files, open up the 32-bit FFmpeg archive, and get to the point where you can see all of these bin doc, presets, etc. folders. You don't technically need to copy all of these files and folders over, although you do need to have a separate subfolder for the FFmpeg binary in here in order for this process to work. And I'll show you why in a sec. So once we've extracted out everything, you will see that in the bin folder here is where ffmpeg.exe is, as well as the ffplay and ffprobe commands. I don't generally use these, but it can be cool to have if you need to troubleshoot something. The key thing here is that we want to keep this directory open for the moment. And you'll see why in a sec here, because we're going to create a batch file. Now, since I've put this in the Program Files x86 folder, which is a system folder, you can't create new files with the right-click menu. See, you only get the folder option here. If you create a file somewhere else on your system and then copy it over, it works just fine. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to right-click on the desktop here, do New, Text Document, and I'm going to call this FFmpeg 32 and change the 3-letter extension from .txt to .bat. And you've got a batch file ready to go here. So let's edit this batch file first. And what we're going to type in is @echo off. And then on the next line down, in quotes, we're going to put in the path and name of the FFmpeg binary that we're trying to run. So we're going to go back to this window, click on the address bar, select it, copy it, and paste that in over here. Then add another backslash and ffmpeg.exe. Okay, close the quotes, then do a space, then do a %sign and an asterisk. And there you go. Save that. And now, go back up one level to the main FFmpeg 32 folder and move your batch file over there. Okay, so what we've just done here is we've created a batch file that will respond to the command FFmpeg 32. And this is actually what we're going to point to from our system path statement, which I'm going to show you in just a bit here. But first, we're going to set up the 64-bit version. Now, I like to do this just for organization's sake in program files, because that's where 64-bit programs are generally installed. But again, it doesn't really matter. You can set this up pretty much anywhere you want on your system. Okay, so I'm going to do the same sort of deal here. New folder, FFmpeg 64. Go into that folder and open up the 64-bit version of FFmpeg. Go into that folder and copy over everything that I need into the FFmpeg 64 folder. Okay, so once again, I'm going to go into the bin folder in there. I'm going to create a new batch file. So new text document. Call this one FFMPEG 64.bat. Open it up at echo off in quotes. Okay. Select the address bar, copy that address, paste it in. Okay, then add a backslash, ffmpeg.exe, close the quote, do a space, %, asterisk, save, close it, go back up one folder level here, and move ffmpeg64.bat into your FFmpeg64 directory. Now, go to your start menu, type run, and then in the open dialog box, type control space sysdm.cpl, and click OK. This will take you to System Properties. On the Advanced tab, you go down to Environment Variables, go down to your Path System Variable, click Edit. OK. Now you notice that I haven't closed any of these windows back here. All right, so what we're going to do is similar to what we just did to make the batch file, except we're going to be copying the address of this FFmpeg64 folder. We're not going to go into the bin folder here. Okay, so just copy that address, go back to the Edit Environment Variable window, click New, and paste, and hit Enter. Okay, and then we're going to do that same process for the FFmpeg32 folder. Once that is done, click OK. 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 And now let's test and make sure that we did everything right here. So go to your start menu, type in CMD, and click on the Command Prompt app. Okay. Now type in FFmpeg32, hit Enter. After a couple of seconds here, you should get this whole long list of options and this use -H to get full help, or even better, run man FFmpeg. That's telling you that FFmpeg is working. Okay, now we're going to type FFmpeg64. And if everything's set up properly, you get the same message. Cool. So now we know that FFmpeg is set up properly. And as you can see, you can choose the 32 or the 64-bit version depending on what you type into the command prompt or your batch file that you set up as per my previous video tutorial. Okay? I'm going to show you just briefly an example of the end workflow in just a bit here. But there is still one more step to go. All right, and that's setting up AVISPmod. As with all of these other programs, you can put AVISPmod pretty much anywhere you want in your system. However, you are going to have a similar situation to FFmpeg in the sense that you will have a 32-bit and a 64-bit version installed on the system. The only downside with this is that you can only select one of them to automatically open AVISynth scripts. So I generally just use the 32-bit version for that purpose because it is more stable or whatever. I'm just going to put them in my main system directory here. As I said, you can put them anywhere you want. So AVISPmod 32-bit. you can just open it up and copy out this AVSPmod folder. Shouldn't take too long to extract. Just rename it, okay, which you can do like so, to AVSPmod 32. All right, then extract out your 64-bit version of AVSPmod and name that AVSPmod 64. Okay, so pretty simple. All right, with all of that, we are now ready to test this out. So I'm going to go to my special tutorial folder here, where I've got a couple of AVISynth scripts set up. I'm just going to be using this test.avs script for today. If you don't know how to set up an AVISynth script, I'm not going to cover it in this tutorial. Please watch my original tutorial. But I'm going to assume you have one set up already. If you need a reminder of how to set up AVISynth scripts to open an AVSPmod, just right-click on one, go with Open With, choose another app, check Always Use this app to open AVS files, click More Apps, scroll down to the bottom, look for another app on this PC, go to where you have AVSPmod 32-bit installed, open that folder, select the avspmod.exe file from there, click Open, and there you go. So we've got a fairly standard AVISynth script here set up for deinterlacing a standard definition video using QTGMC. So I'm just going to move to somewhere in the file here using the playback head. And because it's the first time opening this file, it might take just a sec here to generate the FFindex file in the background. All right, and just briefly look through it. And maybe let's go to a place where there's some motion. Yeah, it looks fine. Okay. So, just to show you what it looks like in 64-bit AVSPmod, and to check and make sure that everything is working properly in 64-bit, go ahead and go to where your 64-bit AVSPmod is installed. Open that up and double-click on that. And go and open your script file. This actually should automatically go to it because I have done this process in the past, but you may have to navigate to the directory where your script file is set up. All right, so I'm going to select the same one, open it up. And as you can see, everything looks fine at first. Then when you go to preview, boom, you get this stuff. And oddly enough, it doesn't do anything if you just advance frame by frame using the right and left arrow keys. At least for a little bit, if you just hold it down. Yeah, it seems to be fine. But if you go to somewhere else in the image, get another error. And I believe if you change one of the settings, yeah, and refresh, it'll also give you an error. So that is the major difference between the 64 and 32-bit versions of AVSPmod at the moment. But it doesn't matter too much because since in this case, I have all the same plugins installed in the 32 and 64-bit versions of AVISynth, I can just go straight to rendering in 64-bit and skip AVSPmod 64 altogether. So in order to render this out, we're going to create a new batch file in the same directory. So once again, new text document. I'm going to call this test32.bat. So I'm going to show you how to do the 32-bit version of this. Right-click and edit it. And let's see if I can do this from memory. FFMPEG 32. So that will call the FFmpeg 32 batch file you set up, which will run the 32-bit version of FFmpeg. Okay. Then space, then -I, then another space, then the name of your AVISynth script, which in my case will be test.avs. Make sure you put that in quotes. You don't technically have to do that unless there are special characters or spaces in the name, but I just do it to make the script a little bit easier to read. Then space, then -C:\V, a space, and the video codec that you're going to be using. Since I am gearing these tutorials towards video editors, I'm going to select ProRes, then a space, then -profile:\V, and a space. Profile isn't something that you'll necessarily need to use for every video codec. It's designed to sort of select particular variants of a codec. So in this case, for ProRes, you'll be selecting a number between 0 and 3. I'm just going to use 3 for ProRes 422HQ. All right. Next to space, and we have to change the color space to one that ProRes will support. In this case, it's -pix_fmt YUV 422P10LE space -C:\A space, and then the audio codec that you want to use, which in this case I am going to use PCM_S16LE, then a space, and then finally the name of your output file. You can also do path addresses here. So if, for example, you wanted to put it in a folder on the F drive, I could do something like F:/tutorial/ and test32.mov. Now, do pay close attention to the 3-letter extension at the end of your video file. It needs to be a container format that supports the codec that you're selecting. So in this case, ProRes only works with a QuickTime MOV container format. If you try and use it in like an AVI file or something like that, it's not going to work. All right. Once that's all done, go ahead and save this file, close it, and we can try running it by double-clicking on it. And it should just go straight ahead and start running. So keep an eye on the frames per second and speed settings for a moment. These will fluctuate throughout the render process. Just keep an eye on that. And I'm going to be back as soon as this finishes rendering so that we can take a look at what the 64-bit version does by comparison. Okay, now let's make another batch file for the 64-bit version of this process. So just new text document. I'm just going to call this test64.bat. Right-click, edit. And I'm actually just going to open up the 32-bit version of this batch file. Copy it over and paste it. And if you want to know what you need to do to change this whole process over to 64-bit, all you got to do is just change FFmpeg 32 to FFmpeg 64. And in this case, since I've already rendered out test 32, I'm going to change this to test 64. But that's it. It is otherwise exactly the same command. So when that's done, save it, close it, double click to run it. And you will notice right away that there is a speed difference. It's staying up more around 47 frames per second or so, and it's going to go down over the course of this render process. But what I'm going to do is when this is all finished rendering and I'm back in editing, I will figure out how long each of these renders took in total and post those up in text results on screen. So I'm just going to leave this to render for now and come back when it is done. Okay, and with that done, there should be an overall listing of the respective times. I'm going to put that on screen right about now, and you will see the difference in rendering times. It's not a massive change because I'm working with a roughly about 3-minute file here, but if you can imagine over the course of say an hour or 2 hours, this amount of difference in rendering speed is not trivial, especially if you're doing something like trying to batch process a bunch of files at once. So if you are sort of wondering, there is not, so far as I have seen, any visual difference between the 32 and 64-bit versions of this workflow. But just for the heck of it, why don't we go into our tutorial folder here and just check it out. Yeah, they're both 1.32 gigs. And I can open After Effects up and just put one on top of the other and sort of switch between them. Obviously, if you were going to send this file out to somebody else for whatever reason, I highly, highly recommend that you watch through it in its entirety first. Basically, anytime that you're going to send something out to somebody, always check. Even if you've seen the thing 1,000 times before, even if there is no possible way that something could have gone wrong during the rendering process, I've gotten bitten by this before where I didn't check some episodes of a show that I had done some deinterlacing on, and it had a nasty random audio dropout bug. So let's copy these over. And let's go ahead and just drop that one there and that one there. And let's go to a spot with some real detail, like Jake's face here. Yeah, it looks good. This is actually zoomed in already. So this is what it is at 100%. I'm going to zoom in to about 400% just so that any little differences should show up here. So this is the 32-bit version of the process, and this is the 64-bit version. 32, 64, 32, 64. Now, even with YouTube compression, you should still be able to see that this is exactly the same image. So, all right. That's pretty much it for this tutorial. I hope that you've learned from this. If you have any questions about this tutorial, you can leave them down in the comments section below. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, you can, give me a thumbs down, but I would much rather that you give me some constructive criticism or tell me if I've missed something that's absolutely crucial in this tutorial. And if you have like a big detailed workflow that you want to go through, go ahead and post it up on the blog post for this tutorial so that people who are searching for a similar issue on Google might be able to find that and possibly get an answer to it. All right, with that though, we are done with this tutorial. What I may get into for future tutorial videos is looking at how to use FFmpeg on its own to do various conversions. You can do stuff that is incredibly simple with it, but you can also do these incredibly elaborate things that are kind of analogous to what you can do with AVISynth. There are some advantages and some drawbacks to that. So I was originally going to do a tutorial about how to do frame rate conversion, but I need to do a bunch more research on that first before I can give something that's as comprehensive and detailed as the normal tutorials that I do. So if you're interested in doing that, then subscribe to the channel, and it should be coming out within, I don't know, a month or two from now. I do not post a lot, but I do put a lot of work into these videos, so I really do appreciate you watching through all the way to the end. And other than that, all I can say is, until next time, happy video editing.